everyone, this is me, a quick video talking about the samurai Sasaki Kojiro. The reason why I'm uploading this video is because today is the day that he died. He died in a duel against Miyamoto Musashi. This is the famous duel in which Musashi used a boat oar that looked similar to this to kill Sasaki Kojiro. And the weapon used by Sasaki Kojiro was a sword similar to this with a 3-shaku blade, which is approximately 35.5 inches. Now there's a lot of debate as to what his sword actually was. Unfortunately, because his sword wasn't really saved as, this is Sasaki Kojiro's sword. No one did that. All that we know about it was that the blade was 3-shaku. So there's a lot of debate. Some say that it was a Nodachi that had barely any curvature and it was very straight, while others say that it was a tachi. It was his family tachi that he used, and some even say it was a tachi remounted as a katana, and some even say that it was none of those, that it was actually a chokuto, which was an earlier straight sword. So in other words, no one really knows. All we know was that it was a 3-shaku blade. Now one thing though, however, is that many say that the sword was forged by Nagamitsu. So that helps to pinpoint it more if it was indeed forged by Nagamitsu. So 3-shaku blade forged by Nagamitsu. And as for the ska length, I would say, of course, it's going to be a little bit longer than average. But, you can't say for sure, well, this is whatever it was, because, once again, we don't have the sword. I can tell you that from a lot of videos I've seen where people use swords this size, the ska is often longer than 3 fists. So for a katana, on average, the longest, typically, although there is longer, is 1, 2, 3. And then that'll be the end of the ska. This won't be here. But you'll notice that this one here is a bit longer. Mine is 1, 2, 3, basically 4 fists long if I hold it like this. Legend goes that his sword went by a few names because of its size. One name that it was called was Monohoshi Zao, which translates as the drying pole or the clothes rod. The reason why it had that name was because it was so long that it resembled the bamboo clothes rods that were used at the time for drying clothes. There are other names that I've heard the sword called as well. In one book, I heard it called Silver Frost instead of the clothes rod, so that's another possible name for it. Unfortunately, a lot of what we know about Sasaki Kojiro is, more or less stories, unfortunately. However, stories go that he ended up using the Nodachi because the man who taught him was actually a master of the Kodachi, which is the short sword, and he was actually his master's sparring partner. So, as a result, he ended up using a longer sword to have more range than the Kodachi. And of course, a sword like this would have more range over even the typical katana of the time. Also, swords like these were often used in war, of course, as anti-cavalry weapons, and they could even be used by cavalry. So if you're up on horseback, you might use a sword like this. The Japanese quite often, especially with archery, did let go of the reins so that they could shoot their bow. So they could theoretically do the same thing, except using the Nodachi. So let go of the reins and use the sword with 2 hands. Legend also says that Sasaki Kojiro was a very flamboyant man. He quite often wore the clothes of a kabuki actor, actually, for clothing. Which, in case for those of you who don't know, oftentimes the clothes of an average person in Japan wasn't very flashy. They were typically darker colors such as dark browns, black, colors like that. So to be going around in the flamboyant clothes of a kabuki actor made him stand out more. And a man of Sasaki Kojiro's skill level didn't necessarily have to worry about what people thought of his, flamboyant outfits. Plus, on top of that, when you were dealing with someone who was as good a swordsman as Sasaki Kojiro was, I don't think many would have been brave enough to say anything. When you're a lot better than a lot of people, you can get away with a lot more. Sasaki Kojiro went by a few different names as well. Sasaki Kojiro was, of course, his actual name. His fighting name, however, was Demon of the Western Provinces, because of his skill with a sword like this. Swords like these are often depicted as something that a demon would use, and if he could use a sword like this so skillfully, with a name like that, it just went to show he was a force to be reckoned with. He was also known as Ganryu, which was also the name of his sword style, because he did eventually come up with his own sword style, which was involving using the Nodachi. And Ganryu means large rock style. He was known for a particular technique which was called Tsubame Gaeshi, which translates as the turning swallow's cut, swallow as in a bird. The reason why it was called that was because if you look at a swallow, which is a type of bird, they move very fast and erratically when they move. And they can also change direction very quickly, which is where the name of this comes from. It was a technique that went Keisa, Kiriage, and some even say it was followed up by another Kiriage. And the speed that he went from the Keisa to the Kiriage was very fast. I did use this move for cutting, which you will see right here. So it can definitely work. Of course, I'm not highly practiced in this move, so it's something that I definitely need to work on, and I definitely want to work on, so I'm going to work on it. Some of his duels before fighting against Miyamoto Musashi includes one in which he fought against 3 men armed with swords, and all he was using was a Tessen, which is a war fan. One such fight that he had was one in which he fought against 3 opponents, all of them armed with swords, and supposedly all he fought with was a fan. He had his fan, he didn't have his sword on him, so he actually defeated them with a fan, which it is possible, technically. Once again, it would definitely show, for one, that he was a skilled warrior with more than just the sword. Although, in my opinion, to be able to do that also shows, once again, skill with a sword, because you gotta know what you're fighting against. And to be able to use a fan to defeat a swordsman, it wasn't unheard of, but it definitely takes skill. There's another legend in which he defeats his own uncle, and then of course there's the one in which he fights Miyamoto Musashi. And unfortunately, duel-wise, that's really the only duels that we really know of with him. The style which Sasaki Kojiro studied is believed to be Chujo-ryu, and the man that trained him was Janomaki Jisai or Toda Shigen. And Toda Shigen was a master of the Kodachi, which is the short sword. It's like the wakizashi. So, if the story is indeed true, I would believe that he trained with Toda Shigen. Because remember, the legend has it that his teacher was a master of the short sword, which is why he chose the Nodachi, or the long sword. On the day of the duel that Sasaki Kojiro had with Miyamoto Musashi, Miyamoto Musashi arrived a few hours late, which Miyamoto Musashi was known for, but I'm going to cover that in another video. Sasaki Kojiro, who was waiting by the beach, runs up with his long sword in hand and says to him, "Are you late because you are afraid?" To which he then draws his sword and throws away the scabbard. Some say onto the ground, some say into the ocean. It doesn't really matter. Either way, he threw it aside. To which Miyamoto Musashi replied to him that he has already lost because, remember, the sword was considered the soul of this warrior. And the way that Miyamoto Musashi looked at it was to throw away the scabbard like you are never going to need it again means that you don't plan on living. So he said to him, "You have already lost. If you were going to win, then why would you throw away your scabbard?" This taunt enraged Sasaki Kojiro even more. So he ran towards Miyamoto Musashi, didn't bow, which typically you bow before you do a duel. But of course, typically you don't arrive late either. And then it would have been seen cocky to not only arrive late, but to arrive late wielding this, a wooden sword. This was a huge insult, not just, arriving late that, I'll arrive whenever I want, but to bring this as if to say, well, this is all I really need to kill you. I don't need a real sword, I just need this. The bokken that Musashi carved was made out of a boat oar, and legend has it that the oar was actually a few inches longer than Sasaki Kojiro's sword. So, now, turning Kojiro's advantage of reach against him. Another part of the legend is that Musashi fought with the sun on his back. The reason for that is because if you're fighting with, looking into the sun, it's going to be even harder to fight. So, Sasaki Kojiro also had that going against him. And of course, this enraged Sasaki Kojiro even more. So, Sasaki Kojiro took his Nodachi and went in for his famous Tsubame Gaeshi, the Turning Swallows cut. Legend has it, there's a few different legends that I've heard from this. One is that supposedly the cut missed Musashi by inches. Quite possible to do, to have a sword miss you by inches. Another one is supposedly that Musashi was wearing a headband and it cut his headband. And the other says that it cut his headband because it cut his head. I don't believe the one that supposedly it just cut off his headband and he didn't have a cut, because of the amount of blade that would have to be used for that to happen. It's not likely. Either one, it missed him completely, or two, he had a cut on his head. And I highly doubt that he had a cut on his head, because a cut from a Nodachi into the head right here, you'd be in some deep trouble. For one, at least my thought, that's a lot of force coming down on your head. So my guess would be, if we are looking at the legend, he did not connect with the cut. He just missed the cut. After Sasaki Kojiro missed with the cut, Miyamoto Musashi then took his bokken and right down on Sasaki Kojiro's head, one blow, and Sasaki Kojiro was down. From there, the story goes that Musashi lowered his gaze down towards Kojiro, and Kojiro, with a little bit of life left in him, with one swing, goes to swing for his legs while he's down on the ground. So then the story goes that from there, Musashi backed up just enough for him to miss, and came down right on Sasaki Kojiro's chest, and supposedly the story goes that he broke one of his ribs, which in turn pierced his heart. There are some stories as well that say that after the first hit to the head, that he didn't swing again. I'd say that if you took a hit that hard to the head, you're going to be knocked out. You ain't going to be swinging. That would be my thought. It is, to me, more believable that he wouldn't swing again. Because, if you get hit hard in the head with what amounts to a big wooden sword that was made out of an oar, you're going to be knocked out. You ain't going to be moving. From there, the duel was over. Now, there are other stories as well, depending on how you want to look at it. There is one in which that says that it wasn't a duel at all. What it was that Musashi, with some of his students, basically jumped Sasaki Kojiro and beat him to death. Okay, that's quite possible as well. Unfortunately, we don't know what happened exactly. Afterwards, the island that they fought on was later renamed Ganryu Island. Ganryu after Sasaki Kojiro. If you go there to this day, there is still two statues there, one of Miyamoto Musashi, one of Sasaki Kojiro, of them locked in combat in their famous duel. If you read the novel Musashi, you will read a lot of different things about Sasaki Kojiro. Unfortunately, most of those are fiction. It is an act of fiction for the most part. It's based on historical events, and from what I've understood, some of the things that happened were true. However, later on, the author of that book did indeed come out and say that some of what he wrote was fiction. It was part of his imagination that he incorporated into the book. One common misconception is that Sasaki Kojiro was deaf. And that comes from another modern novel, I believe, the manga Vagabond. Once again, there is no evidence to support the fact that Sasaki Kojiro was deaf. So I would say no, he was not deaf. And of course, for him to be carrying on a conversation with Musashi, it would be kind of hard. Although you could say, well, maybe he read his lips. That is possible, but once again, there's no evidence to support that he was indeed deaf. Unfortunately, to make things even harder, there are many kabuki plays that are on the fight between Miyamoto Musashi and Sasaki Kojiro. Why it is that makes it even harder is because of this. Some of them are even worse in terms of accuracy. For example, there's a woodblock painting depicting the fight between Miyamoto Musashi and Sasaki Kojiro, in which it's two kabuki actors, and the character who's depicting Musashi is using two bokens as opposed to one big boken. And the bokens that the actor was using is katana and wakizashi size. There is a boken that was carved by Musashi towards the end of his life, which is basically a replica of the one that he used to fight Sasaki Kojiro. So we know that if he's being completely honest, that part is true. It was a single boken, and it was a very long boken. That's pretty much it. I hope this helped you guys understand a little bit more about Sasaki Kojiro than is commonly known. Now, I plan on doing more of these videos on days that, say, a special event took place in history. I'm going to try making a video like this. So, this video is done, of course, on the day that Miyamoto Musashi and Sasaki Kojiro had their duel, which, of course, did cause Sasaki Kojiro's death. I'm going to have other videos posted on certain days if it's something that maybe some famous person was born that day, maybe some famous person died that day, or in a case of something famous that happened, such as the 47 Ronin when they took revenge for their lord. I'm going to be doing a video on that as well in December when that took place. So, I hope this was helpful and informative. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe. Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I'll see you in the next video. See ya!